Hey guys, today's episode with Jimmy Mellado, the president and CEO of Compassion International, is one that's just going to make you shake your head and say, wow. Incredible stories about the pandemic and how it's affected 70,000 kids who are now left in desperate need of help because of COVID-19. And you can learn more by going to fillthestadium.com to donate and listen to these incredible stories from Jimmy Mellado, the president and CEO of Compassion International. It's coming up right now on Sports Spectrum.
This is Sports Spectrum, the intersection of sports and faith, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Welcome, everyone, to the show. I am Jason, and this is the Sports Spectrum podcast. Our website, sportspectrum.com, that's the place to go for all of our content. Devotionals, articles, stories, podcasts, they're all there at sportspectrum.com. Bookmark that site. Make sure you go back every single day. It is a must-see in terms of content. If you love Jesus and you love sports, it's over at sportspectrum.com. And at the top of the website is a little icon that says newsletter. And you can click that newsletter icon and you can sign up for our weekly newsletter. It's free. It comes to your email inbox once a week. We don't flood your email. But once a week, we'll send you an email with what you may have missed from Sports Spectrum, the articles, the stories, the podcast, the devotionals. We'll send that to you in an email each Wednesday when you sign up for our newsletter at sportspectrum.com. And if you do sign up for our newsletter, we got a free gift for you, a 10-day Sports Spectrum devotional written by professional athletes. The athletes themselves from the worlds of NFL and MLB, the NBA, all sports are covered. A 10-day devotional written by athletes from these sports. So they write the devotional and they tell you about what Jesus is doing in their lives, and they encourage you. So with this devotional, you can go through it yourself for 10 days. You can go through it with a team, with a men's group. It's free. It's a digital download that comes to your email, and you sign up right now at sportspectrum.com, and you get that digital download, the 10-day devotional for free when you sign up for our newsletter. sportspectrum.com. Today's show with Santiago Jimmy Mellado, the president and CEO of Compassion International. Man, the stories that you hear from Jimmy today on the show, they're going to make you shake your head. They really are. They're going to blow your mind in what's really going on across the continent, across the world because of this pandemic. And when you know about Fill the Stadium, we've told you about it, 70,000 kids left in desperate need of help, in poverty, in dire situations because of the pandemic. Jimmy tells you how that came about and what's being done, but he goes even deeper and tells you about the pandemic impact that is not making the mainstream news. My goodness, the stories here he tells are just incredible. Jimmy Mellado, president and CEO of Compassion International, is our guest today. Take a listen to Jimmy on Sports Spectrum. Jimmy Mellado, welcome back to Sports Spectrum. How are you, buddy?
Man, it's great to be back with you, Jason. Appreciate the time and look forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Let's start. And this was not on my plans to start here, but I do remember hearing about your experience going to the Masters, one of the great sporting events you'll ever go to. You had an opportunity to go kind of last minute this year in 2021, I should say, to the Masters. What was that experience like?
Oh, it was awesome. And I'm not like a huge golf guy, but I can certainly appreciate world-class anything. And right. Really, it was last minute. Some tickets became available for us to go to the final round, the Sunday, the final round of the Masters. And it was awesome. And, you know, I'm told by all my great golfing friends, oh, man, this was so wasted on you. And I said, well, I'm going to try to appreciate it. Believe me, I'm going to lean into it. It was awesome to see Hideki Matsuyama win the championship, the first Japanese to win, which I thought was just tremendous. But the drama there at the end between him and Scheffler, as Scheffler was getting a birdie, and Hideki was faltering a little bit. It was looking like it was going to, be an amazing 17, 18 hole. And then Scheffler triple bogeys on 17 and like, oh man, it was awesome. And I'm told it was not only a once in a lifetime opportunity, which, the Masters is, it was really once in a generation because of the COVID situation. They only had about 10% of people in and participating and watching it. So there were no stands anywhere. You could see multiple holes at one time. And it was truly an amazing thing to see people coming together, and competition at the highest level was just awesome.
That is such a cool experience. One I hope to get someday. I'm sure many listening are jealous, Jimmy, because they're like, listen, if you put that question out, by the way, what's like a top 5, if you're a sports fan, top 5 sort of dream scenario to attend as a sports fan? And I've gotten to attend a lot of cool events myself, but Masters is usually one of the top 2 or 3 answers from people when they talk about going to an event in person. And you got to do that.
Yeah, I know. It was awesome. You got Wimbledon, you got the Masters, the Super Bowl, and the Olympics.
The Olympics. And let's look at you, Mr. Professional, because you talked about world class. And it's an interesting year because it's an Olympic year, although it's not an Olympic year. It's 2021, which is basically replacing 2020 as the Olympic year. You were a guy that competed in the 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul, South Korea. Now, we're going to talk about Fill the Stadium in a second because there's a unique sports connection with some world-class athletes that are a part of Fill the Stadium as well with Compassion. But I want to go back a little bit for you to your time in the Summer Olympics. Can you take me back to how that experience came about and share that with our audience?
Yeah, it actually, for me, started in 1972. I was a 3rd grader in Nicaragua, and I just was smitten by the Olympics. At that time, it was the Munich Olympics, and I just remember being totally seized by the Olympic movement, the world coming together in peaceful competition, and then to have that disrupted. If you remember the Israeli athletes and coaches that were kidnapped, and then they ended up dying, and they kind of paused the Olympics for a day. I was mesmerized by the whole experience of the Olympics. And from that, I was seized. I wanted to go to the Olympics as a little guy. I started organizing competitions during recess. We were doing high jump with a tree limb and no facilities, no mats, just landing on the ground. But by the time I was in 6th grade, I could jump over my head and just kept going from there. And so it was 16 years of training that culminated in that experience in 1988, which really was a lifelong dream of mine to go to the Olympics, compete. My event was the decathlon. I just loved all the events in track. And so that's what, my event ended up being 10 of the events, and inspired by Bruce Jenner in 72. And then he won it in 76.
Sure.
But it was just a tremendous experience for me. It was truly a life-changing thing for me, actually.
What's your favorite moment from being in Seoul that year and taking part in the opening ceremonies, taking part in the events that you took part in? What was your favorite moment when you think back?
Yeah, well, there were 42 athletes that qualified for my event. I placed 26th, and it was only the 5th decathlon I'd done in my life. And so I was more on the less experienced side of the equation. Now I'm competing against the world's best. The world record holder, Daley Thompson, had won the last 2 decathlons in 88 and 84, 84 and 80. And so here we are in 88, and the competition was just at the highest level. And really the moment for me was the high jump. I mentioned that earlier, that the high jump has always made sense to me. It just made sense to me. And in the Olympics, in my group in the high jump, there were a couple groups in the decathlon, and it came down to just me and the world record holder, Daley Thompson. And so the 2 of us were battling there at the end. And of the 42 athletes, I was the second shortest and the second, lightest. So I was very small, giving up 4 inches and 40 pounds to the average decathlete. And so I knew, Daley Thompson was probably going to win. But this was my moment when it was just he and I going back and forth, and bars up a little under 7 feet, and which for me was north of 13 inches over my head. And I remember you get 3 attempts to make it. And he went first, missed, then I missed, he missed. And then I could tell by the way he missed, he wasn't going to make his 3rd attempt. He was done. Yeah. And I thought, man, I'm getting pretty done too. If I don't make it on this one, I'm going to miss it too. And I don't pray during sports. I really believe God's more interested in the wins that are internal than the wins that are on the human scoreboard. So I really have never made praying for wins a part of my life athletically. But in that moment, I said, Lord, he's probably going to win the whole thing. I don't need to win the whole thing, but if I could just have this one moment, that'd be great. And so I did pray that I could make that jump, and did. So I, as one of the shortest guys in the field, I won I won my group in the high jump, and ended up, beating him in at least the world record holder in 3 of the 10 events. So that was really the moment for me. Had a little bit of drama itself in that situation when we were just the 2 of us battling it out. And afterwards he came up to me and shook my hand, say, "Hey, good jump." And cool. That would be it.
You had your moment. And I wonder, do you have the old VHS tapes and ever break them out and show your kids and say, "See, Dad was a pretty good athlete back in the day." You ever break those out?
Yeah, no. Some years ago, they put some of them online. So, yeah, they've seen them.
Okay. Find them on YouTube, right? Jimmy Mellado is joining us here on Sports Spectrum, a former Olympian, also the president and CEO of Compassion International. Before we get to the Fill the Stadium impact with the pandemic, I'm just imagining if you were in the Olympics preparing for 2020 and then it gets canceled or postponed, I should say, and now people are preparing for it, hopefully in 2021, how do you think you would have fared having to react to training and then having the Olympics delayed and all that's taken place in the past year?
Well, for me, it would have been devastating because track is not one of those sports like basketball, football, baseball, where you're filling stadiums of 50 to 70,000 people all the time. Yeah. Some of the lesser attended sports like, archery or crewing or judo, track, we count on the Olympics. Because that every 4 years, we know it's a main event in the world. 3 billion people are going to tune in to the Olympics every time. And stadiums are going to be at 100,000 packed. So as a track person, I grew up not being used to having stadiums filled. Like you got dedicated parents go to track meets, And so the Olympics is key. And I remember training in back in 1980, and there was a world-class decathlete for the United States, and he was gearing up for 1980. And then Russia invaded Afghanistan, and Jimmy Carter, the president, Jimmy Carter decided not to send the U.S. team. Well, that was it for him. He didn't go in 84. Right. So you peak physically, and you got to peak at the right time. And if you miss that window of 4 years, and you have an 8-year window between Olympics, it really is devastating, especially for so many of the sports that count on the Olympics to be the main event for you. Everybody's gearing for that. Other sports like soccer, the main event is the World Cup, not the soccer Olympics, but not in track and field and, as swimming, events like that. The Olympics is the main event. And it just, to me, is devastating to cancel the Olympics. And since 1896, they've only canceled 3 totally, 2 at World War II, 1 in World War I. But, and I hearken back to the dream that I caught the Olympic movement dream as a 3rd grader of the world coming together in peaceful competition. And what most people don't know is that the Olympics was more than just an athletic competition. It was also an artistic and cultural movement. And that part of it ended after World War II, but up to World War II, it was a cultural movement as well, not just an athletic movement where the world would come together to learn about each other, build relationship, connect with other cultures in peace. And in the Greeks started the Olympics, ancient Greek, and then we revived them in Greece in 1896, Pierre de Coubertin. And in ancient Greek mythology, the dove is a symbol of peace. And the dove has been central to the Olympic movement. Every opening ceremony, you see all the doves being let loose, declaring peace. This is about peace. So anytime the Olympics doesn't happen, something really bad in the world is going on. So now you got to do what you got to do because of COVID. And so they moved it a year. I get that. But I'm really glad that Japan is moving forward with the Olympics this year.
Same here. And the pandemic didn't just cancel the Olympics. It hit the world. Not cancel. I keep saying canceling. It's actually postponing, but it did sort of cancel it for a year. It's postponed now. And like you said, they're moving forward. The pandemic didn't just cancel and postpone the Olympics, though. It hit the world really hard in so many ways. And Compassion felt that as well. Compassion International, where you are the president and CEO, Jimmy Mellado. Can you take me back to March 2020? Or maybe it was even a little bit before that, but it was March when everybody kind of stopped in the middle of March of 2020. And just your initial thoughts as the leader of a ministry, a very large ministry that impacts so many people and so many kids who get a chance to hear about Jesus, but also get the basic necessities, and a ministry that relied so heavily on large crowds like concerts and events in helping get these kids sponsored. Take me back to what your initial feelings and thoughts were when you saw that this thing was coming.
Well, the first thing that hit us really was what's going to be the impact on the children.
Yeah.
I mean, we're dealing with children and families that are living in poverty, some of the toughest circumstances and toughest communities to be living in the world. So they're already in a life-threatening circumstance, and then COVID hits. And I want you to know probably most of you haven't heard about compassion. I want you to think about three things when you think about compassion. The first one is that we're Christ-centered. So we do everything in Christ for his sake and his name and his way. Number two is that we're church-driven. So we only do ministry in partnership with local churches, indigenous leaders in all of these communities around the world. And then we're child-focused. It's about holistically serving and building into that child. And the funding of sponsorship goes to addressing anything that will keep that child from reaching their God-given potential. Right. And it's that local church that's the key. They're the real heroes in all of this. And so our program is about 250 kids. We partner with 8,000 churches, about 250 kids per church, and they come to the church for the program. And it could be health, it could be education support, nutrition, spiritual and emotional support. They come to the church. Now COVID hits.
Right.
They can't come to the church anymore. So now all of a sudden they can't come to the program. They can't get the health. So what are we going to do? So we had to pivot instantly when the shelter in place thing started about a year ago. And instead of them coming to the program, we had to kind of empower the 100,000 workers or so that work on the front lines in these churches to take the program to the kids and their families, and to stay in touch with them, to support them emotionally and spiritually, and to stay in touch with their physical needs. And really what bubbled up to the top was food. I mean, they were certainly afraid of the virus, but they didn't understand it, can't see it. And these are day laborers. And so if they don't go out and work, they don't earn that day. And if they don't earn that day, they don't eat that day. And so they're confronted with a super difficult dilemma as a parent. I either go out and try to find work, I maybe bring the virus home, get it, and give it to my family, and it's killing a lot of people, or I don't go out, I shelter in place, and I watch my family starve. And so we pivoted the ministry and became really immediately an emergency food distribution network. And over the last year, we've distributed over 12 million multi-week family food kits that are sustaining these families because they have no other way of getting food. That's hundreds of millions of individual meals in this last year that is not only taking care of the kids that are registered in the program, but once we go to the family and provide them food, you just can't feed the registered kid. Right. Because you got the brother and the sister and the dad and the mom that are there. Right. So we took responsibility for not only taking care of 2.2 million children, but in fact taking care of 8.3 million people, their extended families. And so the challenge for us, so that was a challenge on the field side, on the program side, in these poverty communities. But the challenge then became on the funding side.
Right.
Because as you mentioned, when sheltering in place, not only could the kids not come to the program, well, we typically ramp up registering children in that December, January, February, March zone in anticipation of literally hundreds of events, concerts and conferences, Compassion Sundays in churches, where we just tell the story of the need that children have to be connected with a sponsor to fund their care in the context of these local churches. And now we had 1,241 events canceled because of COVID.
Yeah.
And so now we just ramped up our registration, 70,000 kids in our programs, ramped registrations up. And we typically take about 30 to 60 days to match them with a sponsor. Well, now we couldn't match them with a sponsor. So do the math.
Right.
$38 a month, 12 months times 70,000 kids. That was like a $35 to $40 million budget issue that we had to deal with. And I was so proud of the team, the leadership team. When our CFO let us know, guys, we have a problem, we have an issue, we just registered all these kids and we're not going to find sponsors for them for at least a year, maybe more. That's going to create a $35, $40 million budget issue for us. And I was so proud of the team because there was no debate as to what we would do. The simple solution would be to simply tell those children, those kids, we are so sorry. We didn't know COVID was going to come. We're not going to be able to find a sponsor for you. So we're going to have to unregister you. Yeah. And we said, we are not going to do that. We don't know how we're going to fill this $35 million issue yet, but we have more options than they do.
Right.
And we know that if we unregister them, what we're sending them and their family to, and that is not going to happen. So we honestly, Jason, stepped out in faith and said, we're not going to unregister, and still have not unregistered a single child. We've kept them in the program, kept their families sustained. But then I shared that story with some pro friends, former pro athletes and existing, Steve Stenstrom, the president of Professional Athletes Outreach, and Nate Solder, left tackle for the New York Giants. And they were just asking me, like, how's it going? And I kind of told them this story.
Right.
And then Steve that night went home and he Googled the average size of an NFL stadium. It was 69,444, about 70,000. And he thought, that's interesting. We're not filling stadiums right now because of COVID, but this stadium is a stadium that we can't let remain empty. Let's care. Let's find a way to care for these 70,000 children and their families in this season. Let's fill that kind of a stadium while we're not filling the other kind of a stadium. And so Nate caught that vision and said, we'll get this thing going and we'll take care of 2,000 families. That was $1 million. And then another athlete, Chris Davies, first baseman for the Baltimore Orioles, he said, not to be outdone, but we'll care for 2,000, 200 families. That's like that's a little north of $1 million.
Sure.
And then it just started taking off from there. We started having athletes on the baseball side, on the football side, hockey, soccer, on the golf side. Zach Johnson and the Sam Burns, who just won his first GPA Tour event last week. Yes. Sam Burns, he stepped in to help fill the stadium. And Jason, you were a part of that. You were helping get the message out. And I'm so pleased to say we're about a year into it. And of the 70,000, we've now crossed the 50,000th child mark.
Amazing.
Caring for them. That's $25 million that have been raised, led by about 40 pro athlete families.
Wow. I love it. I talk about it a lot, but it's only in short spurts when I'm talking about it on the show because it's, a 2-minute, 1-minute mention or whatever, thanks to your wonderful partnership with Sports Spectrum. But when you hear it told in that way, that story, it really, if it just isn't moving you as you listen right now, I'm sorry. Like, this is incredible. And that's why I'm a part of Compassion. That's why we sponsor a child. That's why we've given more into this Fill the Stadium as well, because it's such an important time in a moment where I've been fortunate with PAO and with Sports Spectrum to keep my job. So many are struggling overseas. So it's fillthestadium.com as people are listening and they want to check it out on their phone. Maybe they're listening and they just want to go check out the website. It's fillthestadium.com. And I know there's a ton of sort of pandemic news out there, Jimmy, that we see every day. But there's also the pandemic impact that isn't making the news. And maybe that's part of what you already shared. But can you kind of, and share a little bit more about the side that isn't making the news, the impact that isn't making the news that Compassion has been seeing and has been wanting to be a part of?
Yeah, well, you're right, Jason. You look at the United States and the news cycle has been filled with, the COVID response here in this country, social unrest, politics, the economic impact of the shutdown on our economy. These are all really serious and concerning things that we should be talking about. But what we're not talking about is the devastation of the virus, the pandemic in the developing world. We're getting some glimpses about the horrors that are occurring in India.
Right.
But I can tell you they've been going on like that in other countries already for some time. And that's not in the news cycle. Places like Ecuador and Peru. Ecuador, by the end of the year, the majority of their population is going to be thrust to living under the poverty line once again, 52%.
Wow.
Their GDP is going to decline by double digits. And by this year, double digits. So what's happening in these smaller countries, they're not getting the visibility. And then we talk about maybe light at the end of the tunnel. And, I've got my 2 vaccines, so I'm fully vaccinated. And,
Same.
and we're starting to open up and we're saying, hey, maybe by summer, fall, we're going to be back to more kind of a normalcy of the way things were. That's not going to happen in the developing world. We're talking about hundreds of millions of vaccines here in the United States. Anybody that wants to get one can get one. Here's the reality for half of our countries. Half of our countries don't have the means to buy the vaccines, let alone the infrastructure to distribute the vaccines. And so the World Health Organization is trying to step in that gap. They created a COVAX program. And the COVAX program is for a lot of these underdeveloped countries to have other countries donate vaccines or money so that they can provide these developing countries with, at most, their goal is to get availability of vaccines for 20% of the country's population by the end of the year.
Wow.
So by the end of the year, at best,
right,
is to get 20% of their population vaccinated. And we all know herd immunity is 60, 70, somewhere in that zone percent of a community vaccinated. So the issues of COVID and the pandemic are going to stay with the developing world for quite some time. And then you got the economic impact of that. The World Bank is now estimating that 150 million people are going to be thrust back into living on less than $1.90 a day because of COVID.
Wow.
We have made such progress over the last 3 decades, helping people get out of living, out of extreme poverty. For 30 years, every year has been progress. Not this year. This will be the first year of 30 where we're going to go backwards. And so I just want to ask us all that are living in a different reality to not forget the devastation and the suffering that is going on right now and is going to continue to go on for a year, 2, in some places, maybe even 3 years.
Wow, Jimmy, it's shocking when you hear it told that way. And again, if it doesn't move you, our spirits, especially being Christ-centered with what compassion is about, we were to care for the orphans and the poor and those that are in really bad situations. And it is here too. There are people in their situations here that we need to worry about in our country. But around the world, when those developing countries, when you hear that they could be set back for years and years and years, how can we not want to go and help in some way? And Fill the Stadium is just part of that, Jimmy. Tell us a little bit more, if people are listening, like when they donate and when they go and help with Fill the Stadium or anything that Compassion is working through, exactly right now because of COVID, where that's going, where their money is going, just to know that, because everybody has a little hesitation when they want to jump into a charitable endeavor. They want to know that their money's going to help people. They want to know that what they're going to invest in is actually making a huge difference. And I know that Compassion is. I just want to hear it from you.
Yeah, leaders long before me made some incredible, amazing decisions about strategy. And they chose the strategy to be not to train like Westerners and send them, but to get behind the indigenous leaders in the communities where we want to serve. So it really is that local church in that community that we get behind. So we serve them. Now, what's cool about that is that the resources that come to Compassion, there are no go-betweens then between us and that community. So we don't go through the government or other agencies. That money goes straight to that local church. And in many of these places, we were able to pivot and mobilize to serve the communities immediately. Mm-hmm. Whereas governments took time to mobilize and begin to try to serve all the communities. Then the under-resourced communities weren't the first ones being served. Those were our first ones to be served. Right. So the resources that you provide go right to that local community where the hurt is the greatest. So I love the efficiency of that. And this is in a real tangible way what it provides. I mentioned those 100,000 workers earlier in these 8,000 churches. You're equipping them to provide assistance to these families that they know them by name. They know where they live. They're visiting them regularly and they're bringing them food. We've distributed, as I mentioned earlier, over 12 million multi-week family food kits. So think each kit is like a table full of flour and other ingredients where families can take care of where moms and dads can take care of their families. So it's food, providing them food. We've distributed over 8 million hygiene kits, training them on the virus, how it spreads, how you get it, how to protect yourself, hygiene materials, giving them all masks. Things that they can clean their hands with, all of that. We've also provided educational support because there's 1 billion kids because of COVID that are out of education right now. Wow. In the world.
1 billion, so you said with a B.
1 billion. A billion kids. I mean, our kids were able to pivot and do online school, and we know that's hard and that's tough, and people are complaining about the difficulty of that. But at least they're engaging in their education. They're not skipping a year of no education. Well, when you shut things down in the developing world, they're like an in-person situation there. There's no school. There is no internet. Yeah. To just flip over and do school via internet. So they're just missing school. 1 billion kids. So we're trying to bring the education to the kids as much as we can on the education side as well. And then the other thing that we're doing is providing child protection training. Now think about that. We know that abuse and domestic abuse is going up. When you put a family in together in close quarters in a pressure situation, you can't go out, a lot of suffering going on, tempers might flare. The people that pay the most are the children, the defenseless, the most vulnerable. They're the ones that pay. So we're providing emotional support to the leaders and the families and training around child protection so that when tempers flare, kids don't pay.
Yeah, that's really, really important. He is Jimmy Mellado. Again, the website is fillthestadium.com. People need to go check it out, fillthestadium.com. My last question for you, and I asked this a couple years ago to you, what was God teaching you at that time? What's he teaching you now when you think back to 14, 15 months ago and all that's taken place and, the devastation, but even the hope that's been provided by so many, including our pro athlete friends that we both have been working with through Sports Spectrum and PAO and Compassion. What's the great lesson the Lord is teaching you and showing you right now as you think back to these last few months?
Yeah. I think for me, Jason, it's that just a deeper sense of conviction that the most important contribution I can make to the kingdom of heaven is actually the person I'm becoming. There's a lot of important things to do. I mentioned a lot of them: serving the poor, addressing those that are suffering and in pain. A lot of important things to do. But all of that only has meaning when it's coming out of the soul, out of a person who is increasingly reflecting the character of Christ, because then it'll be properly motivated. And as you do the work of God, you'll do the work of God in ways that build the work of God in you and those you're serving. If you're doing it outside of that, it could go askew. You could do it wrongly motivated, which means you'll do it in the wrong spirit, in the wrong way. And so it's almost like in the airplane, when they say when the oxygen mask comes down, it says, put on your oxygen mask on you first before you can help someone else.
Yes.
The best contribution you can make to the kingdom and to other people in helping them is, in fact, a healthy you and a strong soul in you. And so when pressure comes, our weaknesses, our faults, our deficiencies have a way of expressing themselves more. What's in you comes out when pressure is on. So the more quality of a person, the more mature person you are, you're able to show up under pressure in ways that are productive and not destructive. So it might sound a little counterintuitive, but I've been just so convicted even more so about the healthy rhythms in my own life to build sustainability so that I can naturally live out the fruit of the Spirit in the normal course of the challenges that are coming my way. And it's the only way, being centered like that, it's the only way that I've been able to have a calm heart and a clear mind to be able to serve other people. And the scriptures are very clear that in this world, we will have tribulations. You will go through storms. And the only way to have a calm heart and a clear mind is to know they're coming and to walk with Jesus in them.
So well said. He is Jimmy Mellado, the president and CEO of Compassion International. FillTheStadium.com is the website. Make sure you go check it out. Jimmy, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I hope we don't have to do this again in the sense of a pandemic and what we've been talking about, but I definitely hope we can have a conversation again for sure and see all the great things that God is going to do. Not that he hasn't already done them, but what he's going to continue to do through Compassion and Fill the Stadium. Thanks so much for joining us, my friend.
Well, thanks for the privilege, Jason. And thanks to everybody tuning in. And I'm just asking you to do one thing, just answer the question of what would God want you to do with this information that you now know that you can't unknow? And so I just ask you, just ask that question and only do what you think God would want you to do. Nothing more or less.
That's it. Thanks, Jimmy. And a big thank you to Jimmy Mellado, the president and CEO of Compassion International, for joining us here today on the show. Storytelling at its finest, my goodness. And the stories that he's sharing, those are real life stories of kids and families in desperate need of help, in crisis. And you can make a difference. If you have $5, $10, $100, $500, $1,000, heck, if you're like Chris Davis and Nate Solder and you have $1 million, this is a way to make a difference in a child's life, in a family's life, and do it today. And you know it's going to impact them directly. Your money's going to go help these families in crisis. You can donate right now at FillTheStadium.com. You go to the website. You can see the athletes that are involved with Compassion. There's a ton of athletes, big names, by the way, that are involved with Compassion, and you can donate. FillTheStadium.com is the website, and my goodness, it's such a great program to get behind. We are all in on Compassion in the Romano household. Sports Spectrum is all in with Compassion and Fill the Stadium. That's a great partner to us, and we want to support them as best as possible. And certainly by simply going to FillTheStadium.com and donating, you support an amazing cause, but you're actually helping these kids that are left in crisis. FillTheStadium.com is the website. Again, many thanks to Jimmy Mellado for joining us here on the show. Thanks to you as well for listening. Make sure you go check out SportsSpectrum.com. You sign up for our weekly newsletter. You get our free 10-day devotional emailed directly to you. You can sign up at SportsSpectrum.com. And lastly, whatever app you're listening to this podcast on, make sure you click subscribe so that you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast, and then tell someone about Sports Spectrum. Someone who loves sports and loves Jesus, they need to be knowing about our ministry, and use Sports Spectrum as a gateway for you to tell someone else about Jesus. That's what we're doing. We're just trying to bring these conversations to you, and maybe you can take Sports Spectrum in whatever form that we're telling these stories in, whether it's our magazine, our website, or the podcast, and share them with someone who's maybe struggling in their faith. Check it out, sportspectrum.com. We love you guys so much, and we'll see you next time here on the show. Have a great rest of your day.